The morning I found black mould growing inside my pillowcase was the morning I stopped sleeping altogether. Not metaphorically, not dramatically. I mean, I genuinely could not close my eyes in that flat anymore without feeling like the walls were breathing on me. And by that point, they sort of were. My name is not important. What is important is that I am an NHS healthcare assistant. I work 12-hour shifts on a respiratory ward at a hospital in South London. I help people breathe for a living, and for 8 months I was going home every night to a one-bedroom flat in Peckham, where the air quality was so poor that I was developing the same symptoms as some of my patients. Let that sit for a moment. I want you to stay with me for the next 15 minutes, because what happened in that courtroom at the end of this story is something that even my solicitor said she had never seen before. A judge did something that changed everything, and I promise you, you will not see it coming. I moved into the flat in February 2022. It was a second-floor flat on a Victorian terrace conversion just off the Old Kent Road. The letting agent was a company called Harrow and Vale Property Management. The landlord, I would later learn, was a man named Gerald Pitts. At that point, I had never spoken to him. I signed my tenancy agreement through the agency, handed over my first month plus deposit of £2,100 and moved in on the 14th. The flat looked fine in the photographs. In person, it smelled faintly of fresh paint, which I now know is a classic trick. You paint over the problem, you do not fix it, you paint. The first signs appeared in week 3, a dark patch in the corner of the bedroom ceiling, just above the wardrobe. I told myself it was a watermark, old building, Victorian plumbing, these things happen. I emailed Harrow and Vale on the 4th of March, 2022. They acknowledged receipt. They did nothing. By April, the patch had spread from one corner of the ceiling to the entire wall behind the bed. It was not a watermark, it was Stachybotrys chartarum, black mould. The kind that releases mycotoxins into the air, the kind that causes respiratory inflammation, chronic fatigue, and in prolonged cases, neurological symptoms. I know this because I looked it up at 3 a.m. while sitting on my kitchen floor because I could not breathe properly, lying down. I was 29 years old, physically fit, non-smoker. I had never had asthma. By May, I had a salbutamol inhaler on my bedside table. I emailed Harrow and Vale again on the 17th of April, then the 2nd of May, then the 19th of May. I have all of those emails. I kept everything in a folder on my phone, labelled simply Gerald, because even before I knew his name, I knew I would need it. The replies, when they came, were variations on the same theme. The issue is under investigation. A contractor will be in touch. Please ensure adequate ventilation. That last one made me want to put my fist through something. Adequate ventilation. I was working 12-hour shifts and coming home to sleep in a room that smelled like a flooded basement. There was no window in the bedroom that opened more than 4 inches. I had measured it. 4¼ inches. In June, I met my neighbour, Diane. Diane Okafor lived in the flat directly below mine. She was in her mid-50s, a retired school administrator, and she had lived in the building for 7 years. She knocked on my door one evening while I was sitting on the sofa with a bowl of soup I did not have the energy to eat, and she said, and I remember this precisely because it is the first time in months that someone spoke to me like I was a real person, "I know what you're going through in there. It happened to me too." Diane had experienced the same damp problem in her own flat 3 years earlier. She had documented everything. She had photographs going back to 2019. She had a folder of letters, emails, and responses from Harrow and Vale that were almost word-for-word identical to mine. She had also, crucially, contacted Southwark Council Environmental Health in 2020. They had visited. They had issued a formal improvement notice under the Housing Act 2004. Gerald Pitts had been legally required to carry out remedial work. He had not done it. He had submitted paperwork claiming the work was complete. The council had closed the case, and he had simply moved Diane to a different flat within the same building and rented out the problem flat again. To me, I want to be honest about how I felt at that moment. Diane was showing me all of this on her kitchen table, these stacks of paper, and I was not angry yet. I was just so tired. I had been tired since March. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that is not just physical, it gets into the way you think, the way you talk to people at work. I had started making small errors in my documentation at the hospital, nothing dangerous, nothing that reached a patient, but enough that my ward manager had pulled me aside in May and asked if I was all right. I had said yes, because what else do you say? I am living in toxic mould, but do not worry. I was not all right. My mental health was in pieces. I'd been to my GP 3 times since moving in. Once for the breathing, once for what I described as chronic low mood and inability to rest, and once because I had started having intrusive thoughts about not wanting to be around anymore. That visit was in June. My GP referred me to an NHS talking therapy service with an 11-week waiting list. I went home to the mouldy flat. With Diane beside me, I changed my approach entirely. I went to the Citizens Advice Bureau on Peckham High Street on the 21st of June. I spent 2 hours with an advisor named Priya, who was extraordinary. She walked me through the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act 2018, which came into force in March 2019 and gives tenants the right to take landlords to court if a property is unfit for habitation without having to go through the council first. She explained that I could pursue a claim in the county court. She helped me understand what evidence I would need. I went home and I started building my case. Over the next 6 weeks, I did the following things. I hired a damp surveyor for £420 out of my own savings. His report, 12 pages long, concluded that the property had a Category 2, hazard under the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, with evidence of persistent condensation dampness caused by a failed cavity wall insulation installation on the exterior of the building. The mould was not caused by my lifestyle. It was caused by a structural defect that had been present since at least 2019. He estimated the remediation cost at between £8,000 and £12,000. I contacted the Deposit Protection Scheme, the Deposit Protection Service, and confirmed that my £2,100 deposit had been registered. That would matter later. I requested all of my communications with Harrow and Vale under a subject access request. I received 114 pages of email correspondence, and I instructed a housing solicitor named Fatima Chaudhry, who operated on a conditional fee arrangement, meaning she would only be paid if we won. Fatima looked at my file for 40 minutes and then said, "He has done this before, has he not?" Yes, he had. Fatima ran a search on Gerald Pitts through the county court records. He had been the respondent in 4 previous housing disrepair claims in the past 6 years. 2 had settled out of court. 1 had been struck out when the claimant, a young man from Lewisham, simply could not face continuing. 1 he had won on a technicality. In none of the cases had he carried out the structural work. He had paid out small settlements and carried on. This is the moment in the story where I have to tell you something about Gerald Pitts that I did not expect to feel. I never met him. I had seen 1 photograph, a property industry headshot from a now-deleted website. He looked ordinary, late 50s, slightly tired around the eyes. Fatima found out through the process of disclosure that he had bought the Peckham Terrace in 2004 with money left to him by his mother. He had never meant to become a landlord. He had needed the income to pay for his own mother-in-law's care home fees, which were running at £4,200 a month. The building had just slipped away from him. He had known about the cavity wall problem since 2018 and had kept quoting the repair cost against the care home fees and choosing the care home fees. I do not forgive him. I want to be clear about that. His circumstances do not cancel out 8 months of what happened to me, but I understand him slightly better than I wanted to. The county court hearing was listed for the 14th of November, 2022, at Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court. Fatima had filed a claim for general damages for disrepair, special damages including the cost of the damp survey and additional medical expenses, and damages for the impact on my health and mental well-being. The total claim was for £22,600. Gerald Pitts turned up with a barrister. I turned up with Fatima, a folder of evidence, and Diane, who had agreed to attend as a witness. The hearing was listed for 3 hours. What happened in the first 40 minutes changed everything. Gerald's barrister opened by arguing that the mould was caused by condensation resulting from insufficient ventilation on the part of the tenant. He cited a section of my tenancy agreement that required me to ventilate the property adequately. He submitted a 1-page letter from a contractor dated October 2022, stating that no structural defect had been found. Fatima handed the judge, District Judge Annabel Rees-Morgan, a copy of the 2020 Environmental Health Improvement Notice, Diane's photographic evidence going back to 2019, the damp surveyor's 12-page report identifying the cavity wall failure, and a written statement from Southwark Council confirming that the 2020 Improvement Notice had never been formally signed off as complete. Judge Rees-Morgan read in silence for 6 minutes. Then she did something. She looked at Gerald Pitts directly, not at his barrister, and she said, "Mr. Pitts, are you aware that submitting a false completion certificate in response to a statutory improvement notice constitutes an offence under Section 30 of the Housing Act 2004? The room went very quiet. His barrister started to speak. The judge raised one hand. She said she was adjourning the disrepair claim and referring the matter of the false completion certificate to the local authority for potential criminal prosecution. She also issued an immediate interim injunction requiring Gerald Pitts to carry out full remediation works within 28 days or face committal proceedings. Then she resumed the hearing. We won on every point. General damages of £8,000. Special damages of £1,480 covering the survey, prescription costs, and travel to medical appointments, damages for health and well-being of £7,500, which Judge Rees-Morgan specifically noted was reflective of the documented impact on my mental health, including my GP referral in June, and a further order that Gerald Pitts pay my legal costs in full. Total awarded £16,980, plus costs. Full justice served. I stood outside Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court at 1:30 on a grey November afternoon, and Diane put her arms around me, and I cried into her coat for about 3 minutes. She smelled of the lavender fabric conditioner she used on everything. I know that, because I had started doing my laundry in her flat since August, since my damp-ridden bathroom had started making my towels smell like the bottom of a river. I moved out of the Peckham flat in December 2022. I am in a new place now, a proper place, a flat with windows that open all the way and walls that are just walls. On the first morning I woke up there, I lay in bed and breathed in, slowly, and the air was just air, nothing else. Just air. I still have the inhaler. I have not needed it in 4 months. My therapist, who I finally got to see in September, says the physical symptoms and the mental health symptoms were feeding each other. That the chronic sleep disruption from the mold exposure was amplifying the anxiety and low mood, which in turn made the physical symptoms feel more overwhelming. She called it a closed loop. Gerald Pitts closed the loop. The council investigation into the false completion certificate is ongoing. As of the date I recorded this, I do not know what will happen to him. I know that the building on the Old Kent Road terrace was issued a further improvement notice in January 2023, and that all 4 flats are currently empty, pending structural work. I think about that first morning sometimes, standing in the bedroom doorway, holding a pillowcase with black mould growing on the inside of it, so tired I could barely feel my own hands, thinking, "Nobody is going to help me, I'm going to have to do this myself." And the air in here is just air.